Good evening, or indeed, whatever time it may happen to be when you're tuning in. Today we're doing something a little bit different. I have an interview and we are talking to Terry Kitto, author of this brand new book called The Frequency. All right, everyone, we are trying a new sort of experiment and interview. Today we're talking with Terry Kitto, author of this book, The Frequency, which is the first in a quintet, according to the cover. So, Terry, thank you for joining us. How are you today?
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I understand this is your debut novel, yes?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So before I went into novel writing, I was script writing, entering competitions, and I went to uni to study that as well. And yeah, then The Frequency kind of just happened really. It's
Okay.
based on a book that I wrote when I was 12 years old. I used to do a lot of writing back then. I was quite a creative kid.
Okay, so some
And then it
history
kind
to
of
this
got
then.
absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And it kind of got buried away, and I tried to chuck it
Mhm.
out when I was a teenager, but my mom wanted to keep like everything I've ever written, and
Of
thank
course.
God as well, really. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was living in Manchester, a city in the UK,
Mhm.
but then I was made redundant from my job at the time, so I had to move back here. So it was kind of like a kind of full circle moment where I felt like I was starting my life again in some ways. And then I was going through my old stuff, came across this manuscript, really liked some of the ideas that was in it. I thought, you know what, this could actually be quite a good book. So yeah, that was kind of how The Frequency happened, really.
And it was a finished novel that you had, and then you sort of revised it, or it was an unfinished
Yeah.
and you finished it.
Well, I was 12 years old when I wrote it, so to say that it was flawed was an understatement.
Yeah, I
Um,
can tell this is not the work. You sent me that copy, and thank you for that. And I've read it, and it is clearly not the work of a 12-year-old. So,
Definitely. But yeah, just reading it, my kind of script writing brain was kind of firing all of these different ideas to it and kind of connecting all the dots. And the finale, the last 100 pages or so, isn't actually that different from that manuscript 12 years ago. It was
okay,
more the kind of lead up to it and kind of, joining all the dots and bringing the characters to that moment that I had to kind of revise, really.
sure. So it was finished, and then you polished
Finished,
it and
yeah,
revised
say
it, and
loosely.
it turned it into a more of a professional work.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, and since this just came out, I could read the description and I'll and post it all. But could you tell the viewers a little bit about what it's about? I think your words would be better than mine.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a paranormal thriller set in the wilds of southern Cornwall in the UK.
Mhm.
Rasha Abadi, she's a Syrian refugee. She's been relocated to Pointcroft in Cornwall. She becomes haunted by the shadow, which gets increasingly worse over the period of a week. In that time, she's saved by an occult group called the Network, who are a group of psychics that have special abilities that are all linked to the afterlife. And as soon as they kind of bring her into the mine where they're based and they start to teach her how to control her abilities, they begin to realize that she's at the center of a much larger plot. And soon paranormal activity rises, possessions begin to unravel, and they have to make a lot of tough decisions between life and death.
Yeah, and like I said, I've read it and I did enjoy it. It's an excellent book, and
Thank you.
I think as people can sort of get from that description, it sort of transcends genre in a lot of ways. So there are actually a lot of things in that description that I want to ask you about, but I will start with genre because you call it paranormal thriller. This is a
Yeah.
horror channel, and I certainly see there are horror elements. There are also science fiction elements. There's sort of a political espionage element with the network. So
Yeah.
was that an intentional thing? Do you like to work across genres? Or are you mostly a horror guy? Where does that all come from?
Yeah. Well, I guess I have to kind of give a lot of credit to one of my screenwriting teachers, my lecturer. He said that every great story in each genre has already been told. So our job going forward as story writers is to merge genres and merge tropes together. So I think I definitely kind of took that upon myself, and especially when I came to revising this novel, it was something that I was quite keen to kind of explore and see if I could do that. And as well, really going back to when I was 12 years old and that manuscript, I loved horror at the time. I was really into Torchwood, the Doctor Who spin-off.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I think all of those kind of elements were already there. I'd say they're a lot more kind of disparate on the page back then to kind of what they are now. But yeah, I just think, especially with sci-fi, I think there's so many elements to that genre that naturally lend themselves to horror anyway.
I agree.
Yeah, definitely. And in terms of kind of like the political espionage, that I think that naturally came from me kind of just developing the different nuances within the network, and how the different characters want their abilities for different things. And some people, such as Vanessa, kind of treat it as a means to an end. So a lot of it really did come naturally. And thankfully as well, I went through 2 beta reader processes whilst I was writing the book. So they helped me to kind of give feedback where maybe something seemed a little bit too sci-fi and didn't quite work kind of within the mix. So that kind of feedback was really helpful as well.
Sort of keep you in the right on the right track.
Yeah, definitely.
The political elements, to me as a reader, it was refreshing because it was a fairly nuanced, character-driven treatment rather than a preachy sort of, here is the right opinion to have kind, which I think we've all read that book many times. Was that a conscious, were you trying to maintain sort of a balanced to explore politics in a balanced way, or was it just completely coming out of the characters?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I mean, I'm quite a liberal person, but I would never want to alienate anyone from any of the politics that I kind of include in the story. But at the same time, I think social politics is a really important thing, especially when there are quite a lot of issues kind of going on in the world. So what I've tried to do is, yeah, like you said, kind of bring it from the characters and make it their own perspective. So throughout the book, there are some characters that are quite violent or quite radical, and then there are some that are kind of more quiet about their beliefs. And that's kind of what I wanted to do, was kind of represent the world that I see. You know, there are people that are quite balanced their opinions. There are some that are really outspoken. So for me, it was about driving the characters and not trying to put too much of my own thoughts and ideas into that mix. I don't know if you watch Doctor Who at all, or you know anything about Doctor Who.
I do. I'm behind on it, but I do watch it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I think a lot of the fandom can agree that the last 2 series have been overtly political, to the point where even people that agree with that politics can't watch it because it's too on the nose and it's more about the politics than it is the story of characters, right?
That's what I was talking about, because I read, have you read the new posthumously published George Romero zombie novel?
I haven't, no.
That was exactly the same complaint that I had about that one, was agree or disagree, the politics was too in your face, too on the nose, too explicit.
Yeah, exactly. And I just think the best novels that have something to say, that want to talk about social issues, they do it with subtlety. And going back to that Doctor Who kind of analogy, when Doctor Who was so good, they're talking about all these themes, like from slavery to like the economy to yeah, to things like that. But they did it in such a way that it was nuanced and it wasn't in your face. And you got the message, but you did it because of the way the characters are written and the stories they have and the dialogue. It wasn't just someone practically turning to a camera and telling you what to think. Yeah, so that's what I wanted to do. I wanted it to be nuanced. I didn't want to alienate any kind of subset of people based on what they believe. I just kind of wanted to put the themes onto the table and to show how characters respond to it and how characters can struggle through those different ideas, but never have that kind of moment where it's like, this is what you need to believe and this is wrong and this is right.
You know, I think you did that well. I think you pulled that off very well, actually.
Thank you, thank you.
And a lot of people have actually talked about the horror genre as a political genre. Do you agree, or do you think it's no more so than anything else, or
yeah, I mean,
horror with
many genres. I mean, even with sci-fi, like some sci-fi is straight up bombastic, kind of like Star Wars-esque, with no kind of like political or social issues. Although to be fair, old Star Wars still did, but again, it was subtle, it's nuanced. But no, I think for me, horror does have something to say. I think that's where I engage with horror the best. Think of like Silence of the Lambs, Lord of the Flies, Annihilation, Bird Box, you know, those kind of books and movies. I do gravitate towards because horror, and I think there's a quote in the book, I'm probably going to misquote my own book now, but I think Rasher thinks that there was horror that could only be found in the living. And I kind of find that the same with horror and good horror, in the sense that characters, well, humanity as a whole could be the most frightening thing, the way that we can react to certain things and respond to certain things.
Yep.
Kind of like with 28 Days Later, even though that's set in a kind of zombie-ridden UK, the most scary things are the people and the different factions that arise from the chaos that's happening and what they'll do to other humans to survive and stay kind of at the top of the food chain. So yeah, for me, it's really about exploring the kind of the inner conflicts of a character and pushing them to the furthest they possibly can, and kind of the horror that they can enact upon each other. I think that for me is what makes horror.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. Continuing with the political ideas and the idea that you just drive characters to the furthest extremes of horrifying experience and see what happens. I made a video. I actually started this channel during the pandemic. I was out of work. I needed something to do. I started a YouTube channel. My first video was about why do people like horror even in horrifying times.
Yeah.
And I think it's exactly what you're talking about. It's exploring that dark side of the human experience, or as Alexander Solzhenitsyn said, and I'm going to paraphrase, but I'm going to paraphrase closely. He said, the line separating good and evil is drawn down the middle of every human heart. And I think that is what horror really is at the core. I mean, for me, that's what it's really about. It's exploring that, you know, maybe you've got heroes, maybe you've got villains, but it's exploring that interplay between the two.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's one thing that I went into writing this book thinking. I wanted all of my characters to be morally grey to a point. I wanted to feel as though they're real people that you could push either way at any moment, which is what kind of made writing and plotting the book so fun, was to kind of have these different events and push the characters through it and kind of see how they will react to it.
That's what made it reading it fun as well, because it's kind of clear. There's a couple twists and turns, but it's mostly clear who the good guys are.
Yeah,
but it's not always clear that they're going to do the right thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
You never quite know, and they don't know. They don't even necessarily know what the right thing is, and so that makes it an interesting read. And that's what sort of keeps the reader going and makes it fly by.
I mean, I think that's what makes great characters, is that they are flawed. You know, they could make mistakes, and they should make mistakes as well. You know, the amount of times that I've DNF'd a book because the protagonist, the hero, is so practically perfect, they make all the right decisions. It's just sort of kind of realistic to who people are at all. And I think that's why, and it's funny because a lot of people that have read the book haven't liked Sam until like near the end, where he has this kind of epiphany in this moment of, you know, growth. But for me, he was the most interesting character because he does fly off the wall. He has a very kind of cynical approach to life. And oftentimes he's not only self-destructive, but physically destructive as well.
Right.
But that was what was so fascinating about writing a character about like that, because he has this good in him, but he's so kind of marred by all of these negative experiences that he's had. So it's kind of interesting to write this story of, I guess, almost of redemption, really. But yeah, it's characters like that that really make me want to write, especially when you put them into situations that they find themselves in the frequency.
Yeah, which is not necessarily the happiest of situations.
No, my mum is actually reading the book for the first time. She was like, it's good, but it's bloody depressing.
That's a compliment though, right?
Yeah. At least she's kind of feeling something, I guess.
Whether it's
That's
intended, whether it's intended as a compliment or not,
yeah,
that's a
yeah.
win.
I'll take it, definitely. But well, like I said to her, as part of the genre, and she's like, yeah, no, I understand that. And I was like, we're talking about death and the afterlife, and you could write that in a happy way, I guess. But for the most part, you kind of, you know, get what the blurb is kind of selling you, I suppose. So
Right. And speaking of characters' traumas and shaping their characters, that's also a major theme in the book. One of your characters is a refugee from the Syrian civil war. And in
Mhm.
fact, I read that a portion of the proceeds of the book are supporting the refugees. Yes?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I've been talking to Refugee Action for, I mean, basically since I started writing the book, because I knew that Rasha kind of came about because I wanted a young character who had been through a really devastating event, more so than any of the adult characters. And at the time, there was a lot of things on the news about Syrian refugees that were coming to the UK. And I kind of thought that would be a great kind of entry point into that kind of vat of emotions and experience. So yeah, I was talking to Refugee Action because they have a lot of information on the website, and it was really important to me to get everything as factually accurate as possible. Um, because I am a white writer, and I haven't experienced those things. So the last thing that I'd want to do is kind of cause any more harm or distress, onto that community and the people that are trying to, fight for their welfare. Um, so yeah, with Russia, she went through war. She lost half of her family, and then she had a really tough time trying to get to the UK or a safe place. And then when she was here, they had to go through the political system, which is still very much against refugees. So I knew that once I got her to Cornwall and to the start of the book, she was going to have quite a warped sense of what was right and what was wrong, and kind of her place in the world as well. Like she's very, even though she's being bullied at school, she is very kind of disjointed from the rest of the world. She keeps them all at arm's length, which is definitely one of her kind of character arcs within the story as well. But I think there's a lot of kind of elements that lend themselves well to horror, not just in terms of the very kind of the explosions and the gore and that kind of sense of it as well, but there was the PTSD. There was kind of this thing that I could do where I could kind of blend reality and her PTSD in her past, and also kind of bring that into the afterlife as well. To always show that it kind of resurfaces all the time, all these emotions and these memories they're always just under the surface. And it's that kind of horror that I wanted to bring into Rasha's story arc and throughout the rest of the book as well.
That was one of the things that I found interesting was the, I guess you would say, the fusing of what you would call the real world horror, the explosions and the Civil War and moving to a new country, and even the bullies, as sort of low grade as that may be compared to the Syrian situation.
Yeah.
But that real world horror fused with the supernatural horror, because without spoiling anything, they do sort of play with each other in it throughout the book. The real
Yeah,
world situations become part of the supernatural and vice versa. There's
yeah, absolutely.
back and forth there.
Should we do spoilers? Can we do a little bit of spoilery talk?
Sure. I'll put a like a tag on the screen or something.
Okay, great. Yeah, so with the design of the Jai Wondrous, the essential idea really is it's a paradox. It's the soul meeting the soul at another point in time, which goes against the kind of laws of nature that are set within the book itself. And so when the Jai Wondrous is near its own soul or version of its soul, past or present, it naturally leeches off the kind of energies that the soul has. So if there's a lot of kind of naturally kind of negative energies, which Rasha at that time has, it kind of leeches off of that almost as a life force of itself. And that's how it creates itself as well. So I thought that would be a really interesting idea, not just the kind of whole paradoxical aspect of it, but also the fact that it's the negative emotions that the imprint or ghost will leech off.
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting thing because, well, it was an interesting, I guess you would call it a monster. It was an interesting monster just on its own. And the book starts with a fairly terrifying scene where there's this amorphous black shadow, and then it becomes, I think one of the things that horror struggles with is as soon as you know what the monster is, it's usually not scary anymore.
Yeah.
I think you handled that well, that as the characters and as the reader learns a little bit more, yes, we're learning more, but at the same time, as you were saying, it's a paradox. So we're not exactly learning anything useful to us. So it's still kind of, it still gives us the heebie-jeebies, even though we're learning a little bit more about it.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, I have to admit, there was something that came out a lot later in probably like draft 5 or 6. I think I did 9 drafts altogether. But yeah, I've always found with horrors that the scariest part of a lot of monsters is like how the monster looks. It's not necessarily the kind of function that the monster has, for example. So that was kind of a thing that I wanted to do. I wanted to introduce it right at the beginning, how it looks, and kind of how it acts. But as the book goes on, I wanted to kind of show exactly what the monster is. It is essentially kind of the worst part of a person. When they create that paradox and they become the Dry Wanderess, it really only is ever to accomplish bad things, which is something that the characters do kind of grapple with towards the end. Like, is this right? Should we do this? Because if we do, there's only kind of one way it's going to go. And I think for me, it was more about kind of existentialist ideas as well. The fact that at some point when you become the Dry Wanderess, even though you embody that, you're having to fulfill a past that has already happened. And within my book, the past is written, it can't be changed. And so they have to commit certain horrific acts just in order to keep the balance and to keep reality whole, essentially. So for me, that was kind of the scariest thing, was the fact that they didn't have any control in the end. And that even though they're making these choices, those choices were already written. And so they can't right their misdeeds and their wrongs. They have to follow through with everything that was bad that they did or have yet to do. So that was kind of the thing that I wanted to play on as well, as the idea of lack of control and being the other, even though it's you, it's the worst part of you.
Yeah, and I think that lack of control and not really knowing your own dark side, I think that's where a lot of the real horror is. A lot of horror goes it's at a very superficial level, and it's somebody does something stupid or wrong and they pay the consequences for it.
Yeah.
And the simple solution is don't do that stupid wrong thing and you'll be fine. The scarier horror for me is when you either do everything right and it still goes to hell, or it's completely beyond your control and it goes to hell no matter what you do.
Yeah. No, it's funny you say that, because in an earlier draft, I had the characters trying to do the right thing and trying to change the past. But then the embroidery, so the afterlife, always corrected it and always brought them back to the point until they had to do it, which would have been quite a cool moment, but it really slowed down the pace of the book and it kind of bogged down what was kind of the climax of the book as well. But yeah, definitely, I think there is a quote, and I have no idea who said it, but someone has said that horror is like putting a mirror up to yourself. It's seeing yourself for who you are, because usually we try to avoid the kind of the bad things and the bad things that we're capable of, and we try to focus on largely what we can do positively and how we impact people's lives, things like that. So that was kind of the Dry Wanderess for me. That was people seeing the worst of themselves and literally not being able to escape that.
Yeah, I thought that was a really interesting idea, and I think it worked well.
Thank you.
Sure. Let's move on from spoilers. I'll put a spoiler tag on that section, so in case people are worried about it. But you've mentioned a couple of terms that I wanted to ask about, because you mentioned Dry Wanderess is the Black Shadow.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And embroidery, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yeah, embroidery. Yeah. So yeah, so I live in a county called Cornwall, which is
Right.
part of the UK. It's
That
the southern
that's
part of the
exactly where I was headed. I looked them up and I noticed that these are some Cornish terms. So I was going to ask about sort of the influence of the Cornish language and culture and how that plays out in your book.
Yeah, so yeah, so Cornwall has a very interesting history. It never used to be part of England. And there's actually a part in the book set in the 1600s where England or the Britons were invading Cornwall, which is all true. That actually that did happen. That's a part of history. But Britain eventually won. They took over Cornwall. We became part of England and the UK as well. But with that, we lost a lot of our heritage. We lost our language as well. But over the last 20 years or so, there have been a couple of professors who studied the Cornish language, and they're trying to build it back again. I actually have a copy of the dictionary somewhere on my shelf. So it's just really important to me because I'd moved back to Cornwall from Manchester and I was writing a book that was set in Cornwall. I really wanted to bring my culture and heritage into it as much as I could. And so this is where a lot of the terms come from. So embroidery, that's Cornish for reflection. Dasfervia, that's Cornish for reborn or rebirth, hence why the characters that are Dasfervia do what they do as well. And then Jai Wondrous is literally traveler, because at the end of the day, once they achieve that paradox, they can kind of transcend time. So that was quite a kind of on the nose translation there. So yeah, it was just really important for me to kind of have that. Again, with the mine setting of Pointcroft, mining was a really huge part of our economy until Thatcher came along and kind of stopped that for all of us. So that was a huge part of the culture here. And like if you walk down any of the coastlines, you'll see a lot of these tin mines or what's left of them kind of dotted around the landscape. So yeah, just like little nuggets like that, kind of trying to bring my culture and heritage into it. And I think especially for local readers, we get a lot of kind of romance novels set here. We don't get a lot of horror or sci-fi or thriller. So I thought it was really cool to kind of use as much of that as possible in this story.
Yeah, I think it worked well because I could pick up on, I'm an American. I've never been to Cornwall, so I don't recognize the places, but I recognize as a reader that if I were a local or if I had seen those places, I would be able to recognize a lot of the local scenery and some of the local culture. Not that it's intrusive. I had no problem reading it. You don't need to be from Cornwall to read it, but I could sort of get those little nuggets of the history and the culture and even just the setting.
Yeah, definitely. Because I mean, I think when you approach a genre like horror or sci-fi, there are so many tropes, especially when it comes to setting a location. So I really wanted to kind of steer away from like the haunted manor house, and kind of use locations that are here in Cornwall that you may not see often. So having like lighthouses and caravan holiday parks and the mines, things like that, I just thought brought a kind of like a refreshing element to horror and paranormal thriller that you don't often see.
Yeah, I think that worked well, and it was. I'm for a guy who speaks only one language fluently. I'm kind of a language nerd, so I also liked the little linguistic touches that we were talking about, using some of the Cornish language.
Yeah.
Again, does it matter if you even recognize that it's Cornish language? I think you mentioned that one of them was in the book, and the others I just looked up. It doesn't matter. The reader reads it, and they either
Yeah, I mean,
notice or they don't. But it's nice that it's there.
yeah, I mean, I think because I mean, not many people in Cornwall can speak the Cornish language or kind of know it off the top of their head. So for me, it was kind of nice the idea that someone could read it and they could know what the words mean. But that's great because even if they do know, they get insight into what the characters might be about, but it doesn't really ruin the plot or story for them as such. So I wasn't worried about that, but I like that someone could read it and kind of recognize that, oh, okay, that is part of the Cornish language. Like, that's cool. Like, it's representing us and our history.
It's sort of an Easter egg for people who people in the know who recognize some of those words.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
And one of the other things I wanted to ask about, I have no idea if this was intentional, but while we're on the topic of language,
Yeah.
the network uses a it's not a different language, it's English, but they have their jargon, their technical terms for spirits. They call them imprints and all of these different technical terms.
Yeah.
One of them caught my attention, and that was that a spirit possession they call an occupation.
Yes.
And that was interesting to me because possession, it's an economic term, and occupation is a military term. Was that an intentional switch, or was that sort of a happy accident?
That was purposeful. It wasn't necessarily because of the kind of the military connotations that you suggested. It was more because I saw it less as possession and embodying it. But I kind of felt like they're almost borrowing a body for a while, the imprints, the ghosts that do, and then passing on to the next one or leaving that body. So that was kind of where I was coming from with that. I kind of felt like rather than possessing and owning that body, they're there just for a little while to fill a mission. And then thing. So I guess, yeah, with the military connotations, that kind of does come into play.
And I noticed the military connotations because one of your main characters is a Syrian refugee. So there's a military aspect to some of the characters. And I wondered if that's where you were going. But I also like the idea that it's just separate, sort of mentally separating the idea of possession, which is more of a permanent term versus a temporary, well, occupation.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think part of kind of bringing the sci-fi elements of the story as well. I mean, for me, ghosts, they're called imprints largely because in a way they kind of act like hard drives. They kind of gather emotions and experiences and memories. Hence why you have the 6 archivists, which are basically empty souls that people can pour thoughts and memories into, rather than leaving it on like a server that could be hacked, for example. And so I think
creepy as hell too.
Pardon?
I said they're creepy as hell too.
Yeah, to be fair, I didn't mean for them to be there. They're meant to be kind of more sympathetic.
I mean, they are sympathetic.
Yeah,
but they're also creepy as hell. And I think they're creepy because they're sympathetic, because they're empty, and it's like, you don't want to be one of them. That's creepy to me.
Yeah, I mean, with that, I try to make them a little bit more human, I guess, because I think with ghosts, a lot of people would say that ghosts and media are untouchable, that they can't be hurt or anything like that. But I think with my story, I wanted to show a way that they could still be in pain and they can still be abused, in which the archivists are, definitely.
Yeah.
But yeah, with all those kind of terms. Sorry?
Oh, I was just saying that worked well because they they're not creepy in the same way that vampire is creepy because it's a direct threat. They're creepy in that sort of, that's not a good place to end up, kind of creepy.
But yeah, I mean, for me, it was when I was bringing kind of the sci-fi tropes into this book, I wanted to separate the book from a lot of the kind of horror, paranormal, haunting, possession kind of tropes there. So I think changing a lot of those words was kind of purposeful as well, just to kind of bring home the idea that there's a scientific element and understanding to ghosts in this book.
Yeah, that's sort of where I was just at first, was, okay, they have this jargon that they use, and that's just separating it from all the other ghost stories. But as it goes, I started to, intentional or not, I started to pick up on, there are some connotations to some of these terms, and it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, for me, everything that was in the book had to be purposeful. Like, it had to have a reason to be there. Otherwise, it had to be cut. And so I think that was kind of the reason why I did a lot of that stuff. It had to be grounded in the world building. It had to achieve some sort of sense of reality for this book. Just to set up the rules of the world as well, so that people know what is achievable and what isn't, and kind of the bounds and the limitations of what people can do with their abilities. So it kind of all just fed into that, really.
That actually kind of segues into another question I was going to ask, which is, what is your writing process like in your editing process? I know there are some successful authors and many aspiring authors amongst just other fans who watch some of these videos. So could you give us some insight into, I know you said this one's been sort of in the trunk for a long time, and then it was, and then you revised it. But what's your process like? Do you have a sort of an insight into where this all comes from and how it all comes together?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like you said, this book was different because it came from something that I wrote when I was 12 years old. But back then, I wrote it probably 4 or 5 months after my grandfather passed away. And I think it was really a cathartic thing for me trying to process what I thought of the afterlife. And because I remember sitting in the chapel, and there's like a lot of religious readings and hymns and things. And I was just kind of very cynical back then, as you would be as a teenager, about religion, and about kind of iconography that we have related to the afterlife and stuff. So I think that's where the ideas came from. I wanted to explore a world where death didn't mean the end, and where the afterlife is very much kind of the next step in existing, I guess. So that was kind of like the groundwork that I had when I came to revising the book. So from there, I was kind of looking fundamentally at different perspectives of death, and that's how I had the 3 main characters in the end, Rasha, Sam, and Trish. You have Rasha, who is very much scared of the afterlife. She doesn't really want to have to confront it until she eventually has to at the end of the book. Sam still embodies very much me as a teenager. He's very cynical about his ideas on death, which is also why he's quite cynical about life as well. And then you have Trish, who, even though she's part of the network, she does say a lot of Christian and kind of religious things. Because I still wanted her to kind of believe in almost a romantic version of the afterlife as almost like a coping mechanism for her. And because I had those 3 dynamics, and I kind of understood how they could clash when it came to like certain events that will happen later in the book, they kind of helped me to loosely plot the kind of events and scenarios that I wanted to push them through in order to achieve any kind of sense of growth in their character arcs as well. And then really, in terms of the actual plot of the book, establishing what happens at the very end and then working backwards. So I was literally plotting the acts 1, 2, and 3 in reverse pretty much. And so that way I could kind of plot where the characters have to be at the very beginning and kind of understand how I have to move them throughout the story. And always making sure that they face a choice so that they're always pushing themselves in that direction as well. I kind of work a lot differently to writers that I know, because I still write by hand for first drafts. So I always have and I always will. And I think that's largely because I feel like when I'm typing, especially a first draft, I feel like I lose a lot of my voice when I'm writing. It always feels for me kind of very stilted, very robotic, because once I'm on the computer, I'm instantly wanting to edit and make everything kind of concise and compact.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and that's one of the good things about the beta reading process as well, because a lot of people have written my previous works, whether that was short stories or scripts, and they're like, this is great, but it doesn't sound like you, like it's lost something. And that was because I've been editing down so much. So I ended up having to go back to earlier drafts to kind of find my voice again, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So it's a slower process, but I really love handwriting first drafts. There's so much more freedom there. I can scribble about, I can jot down notes, I can do little doodles. It doesn't have to be clean and polished. And I think some of my best ideas really do come from that. Yeah, like I've mentioned a couple of times about beta reading, and that has been quite an integral process, especially because I'm a self-published author as well. Mm-hmm. I know I wouldn't have a developmental editor. So I had 2 rounds of beta reading. And I tried to make sure to kind of mix them up a little bit as well, so it wasn't the same people with each group, just so I could get different insights into the story. So anyone that is writing and that's thinking about being an author in any capacity, I'd highly recommend getting a beta reading group together, because that's definitely helped me iron out a lot of flaws and get rid of a lot of fat that was on the book.
Yeah, I'll second that. I don't have any books out yet, but Yeah, I've got some short things here and there and some works in progress, and I'll agree that a good a good writers group or beta readers or just some other set of eyes
Definitely.
other than girlfriend, wife, mother, whatever, who's just going to say,
Yeah,
"Oh, I loved it," but somebody who's actually going to put a critical eye on it and point out what's good and what's bad. That makes a very big difference in the final product.
definitely. And I highly recommend as well having a mixture of people that do write and people that purely just read, because you'll find that a lot of the times the people who write, they will get caught up in sentence structure and, you know, I guess the craft elements of it. Whereas with readers, they're very much focused on characters and story and if things make sense. So I think having those two different kind of aspects of writing and reading of book culture really help you to shape a book.
Yeah, you can't have one without the other, but you also
Mhm.
don't want to just get focused on just one side of it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And so one of the things that's interesting to me is that you hand wrote it, but then it's published by Pinard Press, which is you, yes?
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah,
And so you designed this yourself. And in fact, one of the things you do is you do book design. And that was one of the things that I thought was interesting was the design of this book, because a lot of it is just, normal, you know, normal pages. But
yeah,
when they're interacting with the frequency, or when they're dealing with these spirits in this afterlife setting, you've got
yeah,
this dark, sort of shadowy uh, design to the book. So
yeah,
so it was interesting to me first that you handwrite the book and then also do these design elements. And it was interesting that you chose this sort of
yeah.
black page for these different chapters. So could you comment on those two things?
Yeah, yeah. I think it all comes back to when I was a kid, when I used to write these novels. I always used to think the authors did everything themselves, including kind of the illustrations in the book and like typing up and everything like that. And so when I was a kid, like that was part of the fun, was also like making the covers and doing the designs and things. And I don't think that really kind of ever left me, that kind of childlike wonder for, you know, being creatively involved in books. And that was largely part of wanting to be self-published as well, was to kind of have that kind of creative control and freedom. And yeah, when it comes to especially the black pages in the frequency, I always find that, I don't know, I always think that books can do a little bit more just to kind of embellish the story and kind of drive home some like the themes and ideas throughout the book. So that's why I have the kind of frequency wavelength underneath all the chapter headings there. And yeah, in terms of the dark pages, they only occur when they cross into the embroidery, so into the afterlife. So that was kind of a stylistic thing I wanted to do to drive home the fact that this is a very different world. It's a different dimension entirely that looks much like our world, but acts with a different set of rules. So I kind of wanted to drive that home as much as possible.
And I thought it was interesting on a couple of levels. For one thing, it just makes the book look a little bit more interesting. Because even if you look, I'm not sure how good the video is, but even if you just look at the side of the
Yeah,
pages, you can see that there's a little something going on. So
yeah,
there's that
yeah,
element, but it also does some of the narrative heavy lifting that you don't need. You've described the embroidery once,
yeah,
and then all you need to do is go to the black page, and you don't need to re-describe everything. The reader just knows where we're at. So it's done a lot of the heavy lifting for you. So there's a lot of stuff going on just from that one little decision.
yeah. I mean, when I was in sixth form, I'm not too sure what that translates to for Americans, but it's
What what
school
what age are we talking about?
17 and 18 years old.
Okay, so that would be like last year of high school, maybe first year of college, kind of. Okay.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So I studied media, and I was very kind of intent on magazine graphics mostly. And so I kind of learned a lot about iconography and about how different colors and shapes and things can kind of change people's moods and how you can associate certain things. So when it came to the book, I knew that when I was writing the embroidery, it felt, especially earlier drafts, it felt really repetitive to be like, oh, they're under like a magnetic black sky. And there's only so many words to describe black and dark and magnetic as well. And I kind of felt like there would be a better way to, because people know that they're in the embroidery because I do say so within the words, but I wanted something else there to kind of, that people can associate with that. So as soon as they turn the page, they already have an impression of what they need to kind of imagine next. So that was kind of my forward thinking with that. You might call it lazy by saying, oh, he's cut some description or he's kind of not introducing the embroidery each time. But I think more important for me was the pace of the book and keeping it as quick as it could be.
And that's the thing, because you could say lazy, but one of my degrees was in mathematics. And one of my professors used to say, mathematicians are the laziest people in the world. They will work very hard to solve a problem once, so they never have to do it again.
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of what you've done. You've solved the problem once, so you don't have to do it again.
Yeah, I mean, I believe in efficiency. You know, I think if you establish something once, there's no need to do it multiple times. And I think, especially when it comes to a creative thing as writing, there are much more important things happening like I said, in terms of kind of pacing, and kind of scene breaks and that kind of thing. Yeah, so for me, that was kind of the origin of the Black Pages, just to kind of like hark home that representation of the embroidery.
Yeah, I think, and I think it worked well, as I've said about some of the other elements. I think it worked well.
Thank you.
And so, but that also leads into, you mentioned you have background in design. And I also read on your website you have background in film, yes?
Yeah, that's right, yeah. So I have 2 degrees in filmmaking. I specialize in film, and then the second was in television and radio script writing. So it was largely based in kind of storytelling and character writing, which kind of naturally lends itself into novel writing. And yeah, but I've always been a creative person, which is one of the reasons why I decided to self-publish. When I was a teenager, I was hand drawing portraits and making commissions out of that. And then for a long time, I was, like I said, filmmaking and doing graphic design. So it's kind of all of these skills that have lended itself into not only the book, but also the marketing side of things, making the book trailers and doing stuff for Instagram as well. So I think that's what it's about, even though I enjoy writing and that's kind of the main focus of my career. There's a lot of world building that can be done with the interior design, the cover, the trailers, anything that you present on your website as well. So it's about just kind of making a cohesive world for people to delve into.
Yeah, and speaking of book trailers, I saw your book trailer, and actually I'll link that down in the what's it so people can see that as well.
Thank you.
You did that yourself?
Yeah, that's right. Yes. So the images that you saw, they're all stock images from Adobe Stock. But what I've done is I've taken them to Photoshop. I've divided it into different layers, and then I've animated them to move a camera kind of in and out of them. But yeah, that was all me. Mostly the kind of editing side of things, I definitely took from film school, learning how to kind of cut trailers and make them as tense and suspenseful as possible.
So is that the sort of filmmaking that you have some background in and that you've done, is sort of short form advertising trailers kinds of things? Or are we talking, have you had your hand in short films and features or anything else?
Yeah, so I mean, largely it was short films. I worked on 3 kind of like dramatic short films, and I've worked on a short film documentary for an Olympics teaser back in 2016. But yeah, largely one thing that we were taught in the film school, especially because I went to Falmouth University, and their film course definitely hones in on like indie filmmaking, and kind of being self-funded. So we learned a lot about having to cut our own trailers and do our own press releases and media packs and that kind of thing, which I'm thankful for, because those skills have obviously transcended now into the projects that I do.
And more artists should learn some of that business side.
Yeah,
Some of
definitely.
those business side skills.
I mean, I've not even really dipped my toes into traditional publishing, but I've seen a lot on Twitter now that a lot of traditional published authors are having to do a lot of the marketing themselves. So I definitely recommend to authors as well, if you don't know how to use Photoshop or any kind of video editing software, I would definitely recommend, even if you can find like a free version somewhere online, kind of just delving into that and getting yourself comfortable with it, because it definitely goes a long way in terms of marketing.
Yeah, and as you alluded to, a lot of even the big publishing houses, yes, they have public relations departments, yes, they have marketing departments, but they're working on Stephen King's account. They're not necessarily working on John Smith, who just put out his first book.
Yeah, that's it. And I think that's kind of one of the reasons why I avoided traditional publishing at this point, especially because money makes money. They're only putting money into authors at the moment that they know will make that money back, plus, more. So I think, yeah, I mean, I could talk all day about traditional publishing and the disservice they do to new writers and smaller writers, I guess.
To be fair, advantages and disadvantages on both sides, but
oh yeah, definitely,
but the publishing industry for sure, they have some problems.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, of course, with self-publishing, you're always going to reach a smaller subset of people. But again, that was one of the reasons why I chose to do it, because I knew that the frequency probably wasn't something traditional publishing would pick up. It's not a mainstream story. It's probably not going to grab a wide set of readers. I think it's quite a niche story in a lot of ways.
I think it might, if it could find the audience, in terms of marketing and distribution, I think it might have a wider audience than you think.
Yeah.
But I mean, horror in general is already kind of a niche audience.
Yeah.
But I don't think your book is quite as narrow as you're suggesting.
I think in my mind, because there's so many different genre elements going into the mix, in my mind, that makes it more niche. But yeah, I can kind of see why maybe it would appeal to general audiences, because there's so many different kind of things going on within the story, for sure. But yeah, I think that was one of the main positives of self-publishing, is that you can establish a platform and a niche subset of readers, and you can do stories that are kind of smaller or quieter, or ones that are really pushing the boundaries of genre fiction, which is kind of what I think the frequency does best, which is one of the reasons why I chose self-publishing, definitely.
And I think that maybe self-publishing is a tough it's a tough business, because there's going to be some subset of readers that just assume that a self-published author is one who couldn't get published, and so you're going to lose some readers that way. And to be fair, they have a point in a lot of cases.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's tough, but when you have a book that crosses genres, the publishers, I don't think your audience is as narrow as you were suggesting, but I don't think the publishers, the mainstream, like the New York houses, I don't think they would know what to do with it. They have very specific ideas of, they're going to put on the spine whatever one word description.
Yeah.
If it doesn't fit that one word, then they don't know what to do. Whereas a self-published author has all these extra hurdles because of the marketing and the distribution.
Yeah.
But the advantage is you can put your book out if it doesn't fit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I started this book already knowing that I wanted to self-publish, and I think there's one thing that I would say to authors is that don't treat self-publishing as a last resort, purely because self-publishing and books that are self-published, it is a very different ballgame in a lot of ways. And you need to find your niche in terms of audience as well, because with self-publishing, it's always going to be a smaller subset of people. I mean, I was talking to my mum about this actually yesterday, is that she was like, well, how are you going to move forward? And I was kind of saying to her, well, I actually have basically a 10-year plan. I know that I'm putting a book out every 2 years, and I know that I have to aim small. I have to think about maybe 20 sales a month, if that. And I have to think about not in terms, I don't have to think about it in terms of money. I just need to think about it in terms of reach. Like as long as I'm reaching a couple of new readers every week, I have to think about kind of building up a readership to the next, and then the next book kind of follows the same pattern, if that makes sense. You have to really rethink about how you're going to push the book, how you're going to market it. And you also need to set your expectations not lower, but just different. You have to kind of, expect that you'll reach less people, but it's not about the amount of people you reach, it really is about the quality.
Right. And both in terms of sort of artistic vision and building your community of readers, but also economically speaking, that can work well because, and I'm not putting traditional publishing down. Indie presses work well, the big houses work well, they do what they do, and self-publishing works well, and it does what it does. But if you publish with, say, one of the big New York publishing houses, you need to sell many thousands of books or you're done. They might pay you a big advance, but if you don't, what people don't understand is you have to earn out that advance. That's an advance against royalties. And if your book doesn't sell enough, they're not going to publish the next one.
Yeah, definitely.
So they have to sell, 50,000 books, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
A self-published author is not going to sell 50,000 books. But if they sell even 1,000 books, keeping a larger share of the profit, the economics sort of start to balance out at some point. Even though it's a smaller audience, it can work.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it depends on who you are as a creative. But for me, I felt like with self-publishing, I was going to do everything in my power to make the book the best that it could be. I'm a perfectionist, but equally, you don't have that kind of pressure that you would have if you were traditionally publishing. I watch a lot of author tubers, and many of them talk about this like debut curse, where if you don't sell out the first print run of your book, you basically, you're not blacklisted, but you aren't given the same kind of attention and money and marketing as you would be if you had. And so there was a lot of pressure on the writers. And even though really it is largely out of their control as well, I mean, a brand new book from the author, that's only going to sell as much as the marketing kind of achieves, and that's what the publishing house puts out mostly. So it,
Yeah, I've heard exactly that story. I'm not going to name names, but I know pretty successful authors who they have a backlist, they've established themselves, they make full-time authors, they make their money, they make their publishers money. And I've heard stories of, a new editor comes in, buys the book, but doesn't give it enough distribution.
Yeah.
And it doesn't just hurt that book, it hurts all the books down the line until they have another big sort of breakout success.
Yeah, absolutely. And with self-publishing as well, I would say that, do you make more money per book in royalties? I mean, I roughly make about 9-10% of the profits per book that people purchase through Amazon anyway. With Ingram Spark, who I also publish with, they get the book into brick and mortar bookshops like Waterstones and Indigo.
That's important. That's
for you guys.
That's the big thing that the publishing houses can provide that a lot of self-publishers will struggle with.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously printing with Ingram Spark, because they're putting books into brick and mortar shops, they have to have a wholesale discount, which means that the book is a little bit more expensive if you purchase it through them, but I do make kind of less money again. So with self-publishing, I would say as well, really kind of, in terms of money, really set your expectations, really understand how much money you're going to make per book. And I'd say that for your first book, and this is from my own experience, you're going to put more money into it than you will make back. But you have to see that as an investment in your professional career and in you as a person, as an author. You may not get that money back, but the marketing and exposure that money can bring you is priceless.
And if you, as you mentioned, if you have that 10-year plan, if you know what you're doing, any my philosophy is any of the various models of publishing, whether it's the big houses, the little indie publishing houses, or self-publishing, any of them can work if you know what you're doing and you have that long-term plan.
Yeah, definitely. And I think with self-publishing, the testament really is you have to really love what you're doing, because that is the thing that's going to keep you writing for a long time and publishing for a long time as well.
Right.
So that's kind of what I'm focusing on. And I think it helps to have a series, to know that you've, especially for me, to know that I've released a book and it's been really well received so far. So I know that I've got 4 more books that I can finish and people are waiting to read it. And so that definitely kind of helps me to, you know, make the next 8 years of my journey. Yeah,
economically and psychologically.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And that's actually the perfect segue into, I was gearing up to ask, the cover says it's a quintet. So I was going to ask about the follow-up, or follow-ups, I should say.
Yeah, so yeah, it's a 5-part series. We meet the main antagonist in the book, Vanessa, who is also, oh, spoiler alert, Vanessa, who is also Edward Penrose. And I can't really give away too much without spoiling the whole series, but he's got some dark plans for the kind of the science and the abilities that we discover in the first book, and how he's going to use them. So the next 4 books in the series are going to be about our 3 protagonists trying to bring him down, and I guess save the world from his paranormal terrorism, for lack of a better word. But yeah, what I can say about the second book in the series is that it's going to be set in Manchester, where I lived for a couple of years, a city really close to my heart, and it has a lot of great history and culture as well. So Rasha is going to be going there as a university student, which is something that she talked about quite a lot in the first book. Only to find that Sam and Trish, who had gone ahead before her 2 years previously, have gone missing, and she can't find any way of contacting them. Possessions rise, lots of dark and twisted murders happen across the city, to which she realizes is linked to a new secret base called the Hive, which she then has to try to infiltrate. So that's what I can say about the second book of the series.
All right, so we're sticking with the same characters and sort of the same,
yeah, there's a couple of
sort of the same plot, but moving on into new locations and new directions. And
yeah, definitely.
And when is that?
Yeah,
do you have
we
a
meet
publication date?
some new characters.
Oh.
I'm saying 2023.
Okay.
I'm not too sure when yet. It depends how well the drafting process goes and how quickly I can get the beta process underway as well. So yeah, hopefully 2023. It took 3 years to write this first book, but I was working full-time then. I'm only working part-time now, so I'm hoping that I can get it done in 2 years. Fingers crossed. But I've got the first 3 chapters pretty much nailed down. And I've got the vast plot of the book finished already, so it should be hopefully smooth sailing from there.
All right, yeah, sounds good. I'll be looking forward to it, because I enjoyed this one, so I'll be looking forward to the next one.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
All right, so I think we're sort of winding down. I just wanted to ask a couple of just sort of general questions. Inspirations, either, I mean, this is a horror channel, so horror inspirations in particular, but
yeah,
general inspirations, horror inspirations, where
yeah,
authors you like.
Yeah, I mean, I know Stephen King is like the blatant go-to, but he was one of the first books that I read when I was a teenager that was like quintessentially horror. And that led me down to kind of James Patterson, James Herbert as well, who like is a big influence. And also James Herbert, someone who I don't hear spoken about often enough, but I've loved his books. I think The Fog and The Rats are like 2 of his really kind of like defining moments as a writer. Yeah, Lord of the Flies, Bird Box, The Haunting of Hill House. In terms of films, like when I was a kid growing up, I used to kind of sneak VHS tapes from my parents' collections. So Hellraiser and like The Exorcist, I think it was the 80s version of Salem's Lot. as well, which were like really big influences for me. And recently, Hereditary, The Witch, A Quiet Place, Get Out. I think films and books, especially with like really good horror elements, but they also have something to say. Um, Things that have really influenced me over the years, for sure.
Yeah, all good stuff. That's all the same stuff that warped my mind when I was growing up as well. Turned me into the horribly twisted person you see now. So I think I've covered just about everything.
Awesome.
So I guess sort of wrapping up, any thoughts that you that I didn't ask about that you want to let people know about?
Yeah, there's one thing I would say as well. If people have read the book and they want more material, I'm releasing free short stories on my website every couple of months, and they're all tie-in stories to the book. So the first one that's on the website now is called The Haunting of Angove Lodge, which is a direct tie-in to a scene that happens in an elderly care home. But we see it from the perspective of the nurse that's working that night shift. So I think it's just really interesting to kind of see all these events unfold, but from a perspective that have no idea about the network or any of the other events of the frequency. So yeah, if you'd like more material, it's always going to be free for people to read if they'd like to check it out. So yeah, if you head over to my website, you'll be able to get started on those.
Yeah, and if you send me a link to those, I'll put them down in the description as well, so people can go right there.
Awesome. Yeah, I will do.
And speaking of, where do people find you if they're looking for more information?
Yeah, so I've got my website and I've got Twitter and Instagram, which is Terry_Kitto on both websites. And I post lots of different nitbits into the world of the frequency, and any updates on competitions and short stories you can find on there.
All right, perfect. And I will, I'll make sure to, I'll either have that on the screen or down in the description, or
Okay, perfect.
make sure to send me links to the relevant stuff, and I'll find some way to make sure that people can see everything.
Brilliant. I will do. Thank you.
Sure thing. So any other final thoughts that deep thoughts? It's early morning for you, it's late night for me. It's both good times for deep thoughts, right?
Yeah, I've got my coffee. I'm still trying to wake up there. But,
yeah, you have your morning coffee, I have my end of day whiskey.
What whiskey, by the way?
I have, there it is, Laphroaig.
Interesting. I've never heard of that brand before. Is
It's
that American?
It's Scotch.
Right. Okay.
It's Scotch for people who really like Scotch. That's not a beginner Scotch. That's for people who really like the smoky Scotch flavor.
You get kind of like the burn at the back of the throat, kind of warms you up a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, they do all these ads where they describe the flavor. They say, oh, it's like French kissing a mermaid who just ate barbecue.
That's a brilliant description.
But yeah, that's what this is.
Not product placement. We're not sponsored, but
Yep, nope. Nobody's giving me any money for any of this.
if I'd like to.
At least not yet. I'm hoping to, grow the channel. If I'll get there eventually, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think you've done really well because you said you started at the beginning of the pandemic, right?
Yeah, it was around March
ago.
or April, a little more than a year ago now. Yeah.
Yeah. No, so you're doing really well.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, 1,000 subscribers already, aren't you?
And you said because you had reached out to and sent me this copy of the book. That was because you found the channel, right?
Yeah, because I've watched a couple of your videos and I was thinking about people that I wanted to potentially reach out to and kind of work with. And I was like, well, I kind of want to vet people, if that makes sense. So I thought I may as well start where I know best. It's YouTube. It's where I watch a lot of reviewers talk about books and book hauls and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So yeah, you're one of those with people that, stuck out to me.
Just out of curiosity, how did you find which video was it that popped up in the search or the related videos or whatever?
It was it I can't remember if it was the Orphan review, because it's funny because we have a TV show in the UK called This Morning, which is a daily program on every morning until 12 o'clock. And the real life story that we were talking about, they were actually talking about that
Okay.
on the show. And I loved The Orphan growing up. And the lead actress was recently, well, not recently, but she was in the Hunger Games movie as well.
I didn't actually know that. I still haven't seen those movies.
Right, yeah. I highly recommend them. Very gory, very dystopian, really good films.
Sounds right up my alley.
Yeah, so I was kind of just doing a bit of research because I go into like YouTube rabbit holes all the time. And that's where I found you. And then I was going back through your list because I saw your recommendations for the quarantine reads as well. So I've got those on my TBR, so I'll be hopefully getting to those soon as well.
There's some good stuff in there. Yeah.
Weird how, I mean, you have to thank the YouTube algorithm as well.
Yeah. Sometimes it works. It's like voodoo to me, but sometimes it works.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hit or miss, isn't it? You just have to pray to the YouTube gods and hope it works out your way.
Cut the head off a chicken. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. That's all I've got. So any parting thoughts?
I would say, just because I think I gave some like quite stark advice in terms of self-publishing. So I will just say to anyone that is recommending self-publishing, it's brilliant. There's so much amount of freedom in terms of how you write the book, how you present it, how you market it. So I definitely recommend to people who are writing their books to give it a strong thought and don't dismiss self-publishing. It's a great community to be a part of.
All right, yeah. Good advice. Good advice.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, and thanks for coming on.
And you're my first like live interview as well.
Oh, good God. Now see now you've seen the janky ass with the bad tech and the crap Wi-Fi. Now you get to move on and talk to actual professionals.
No, it's great. I love it. It's human, you know. It's not, you know, too prim and proper, is it? It's nice and casual, just how I like it.
At some point, maybe I'll afford things that actually work properly, right?
Hey, you never know. 2 years down the line when the second book's out.
Hopefully I can afford at least a decent Wi-Fi connection by then, right?
Yeah, me too. I might have to move for that though, but fingers crossed.
I don't think I have to move. I just have to invest in it. All right. Well, you've got to get on with your day, and I've got to go crash at some point. So I think we'll wrap it up here.
Yeah, definitely. Good night, and thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, sure thing. Good having you on. Good talking with you.
Brilliant.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
My thanks once again to author Terry Kitto for joining us for that conversation. There will be links down in the What's It where you can find his social media accounts, so be sure to go and follow all of his stuff. If you're new to this channel, be sure to like and subscribe so that you don't miss any of my horror-related goodness as well. As for the book, The Frequency, as I mentioned before, I have read this. Terry was good enough to send me an advanced reader copy. The book is now available, and I do recommend it. There will also be links down in the What's It where you can find and purchase a copy of your own. All of that having been said, it's time for me to sign off. So, as always, take care and stay scared.